Welcome. We're so happy to have all of you here today. We are going to be talking about leveraging database individualization, or DBI, as you will hear us refer to design and deliver specially designed instruction, or SDI. Kyle and I are excited to join today. We're going to start off with a foundational slide illustrating the key components to an IEP. You can see that this visual demonstrates we start with our present level of performance and we move across through the required elements under IDEA, finishing out with our statement of special education services. The red box illustrates the main focus of our webinar today as SDI comes out of the statement of aids and services. In our next slide, we are going to look at the fact that, again, our present level of performance, or PLAP, some people call it FOP, some people call it PLEP, we're going to today call it a present level, is the foundation where we start off with all IEPs and state needs, our stated needs for our students. We use those needs to build the support services that we develop through the statement of aids and services. From there, we also sometimes have needs that require us to develop an annual goal. That annual goal is then needed to help support services that are developed through the statement of aids and services and the specially designed instruction that we'll discuss today. That statement of aids and services helps us monitor whether or not we have ambitious goals for our students. And finally, we report progress to our families to ensure that the students are continuing to make that progress over time. This is our foundation for an individualized IEP for each student. At Progress Center, we have a foundation around the decision from the Andrew F. case. We focus on the substantive part of the IEP and less on the compliance. And our whole presentation today is around how do we move away from ensuring that we check all the boxes to how do we ensure that we write IEPs to be reasonably calculated to promote progress in light of the student's circumstances, which is what the Supreme Court ruling in 2017 indicated is our new responsibility. It raised the level of expectations in special education. And the DBI process is a process that is research-based that can help us in this endeavor. Next slide. We have to start off by asking ourselves the right questions. What do we want for our students? What is the current reality of their circumstances? What does a student need to be successful? And how do we maximize those resources? When we're working with our students, we often skip these critical questions in the development of the IEP and setting ambitious goals for our students. Next slide, please. So when we talk about setting the stage and we really talk about specially designed instruction, what does it take to design the goals and the specially designed instruction to create an ambitious growth for our students? First, we know we have to have high expectations. Expectations have to come from both the students, the families, and the educators. And today, when we get to our panelists at the end, they will discuss how high expectations are an integral part of their specially designed instruction using the DBI process. We want to ensure that teachers have clarity, that we understand the learning goals, and we set a program that is appropriate for the student, that the student knows their circumstances, and we understand what the needs of the student are. And that is based off of the Andrew case that I just referenced. And then we also need to know what knowledge, skills, and strategies the student needs to be able to meet those ambitious goals that we've set throughout their IEP. Again, back to the visual around the arrows that go back and forth. This is an entire program that we develop through the IEP. SDI is one part of that program, but the SDI is what we must focus on to ensure the students are meeting those ambitious goals. When we design and deliver specially designed instruction, we have to use evidence-based processes, and we must monitor our students to use that data to make decisions, and then adapt our instructional delivery content and methodology around the outcomes from our students. I'm going to turn it over to Kyle as he starts to take us through the steps of DBI and how SDI and DBI can go together to ensure that when we make adaptations to our students' specially designed instruction, we can enhance the outcomes and ensure students are making ambitious progress. Kyle?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And thanks everyone for taking the time out of your day to be with us today to really learn how DBI can kind of promote specifically designed instruction. So yeah, I'm going to take a couple minutes over the next couple slides to introduce these different steps on DBI, otherwise known as data-based individualization. So the National Center on Intensive Intervention's approach to intensive intervention is data-based individualization, or DBI. So DBI is that evidence-based process for individualizing and intensifying interventions for students with severe and persistent learning or behavioral needs. The process integrates evidence-based intervention as well as assessment and strategies. DBI is really the technical term for what many good teachers already do naturally through a problem-solving process. They frequently review student data and make changes to their teaching based on what works for the student. And really that's evidenced through that data. DBI, however, makes this process systematic, explicit, and really tailors it to meet the needs of the individual students through a multi-step process that gradually intensifies instruction and support. And so we're going to dive into those steps a little bit deeper here. So throughout the DBI process, as Sarah sort of alluded to, we really use progress monitoring data to evaluate the student's response to the intervention, moving to those next components as we go through the steps. So step one is what we would say a validated intervention program that's delivered with greater intensity. And so we usually begin by intensifying the secondary intervention that's already being used. And I want to explicitly make sure that everyone understands that for today's purpose in this application for specifically designed instruction through the IEP, that validated intervention program is really that agreed upon specifically designed instruction through the individualized education program, okay? So step two would be really progress monitoring data are used to evaluate students' response to that initial specifically designed instruction. If a student is still not showing enough progress, then we would collect and review additional data to determine specific skill deficits. So that would really lead us to step three, which is informal diagnostic assessment data are then used to identify specific skill deficits, which tell us how the student's instruction needs to be changed. Step four is more about the adaptation, which again is based on the data. And we may choose to adapt the current intervention or perhaps try something completely different. Again, really letting the data drive that decision making. And then step five is really just continued progress monitoring with adaptations occurring whenever needed to ensure adequate progress. Okay, so again, this first step of DBI, it really is critical that educators are providing a standardized instructional program that has evidence to support its use in addressing a student's identified needs. Again, I want to explicitly say that when we apply the DBI process to students who are receiving special education services, we're really talking about the delivery of the agreed upon individualized, specially designed instruction as the first step. It's really where we start. So I'm actually going to toss it back to Sarah quickly to look more in depth at what IDA says should be included within the IEP. Sarah?
Thanks, Kyle. So we wanted to take a little bit of a deep dive into what IDEA is saying around the statement of aids and services. As you can see here on the screen, you will see 4 components of the statement of aids and services in bold print. We have special education services, related services, supplemental aids and services, program modifications, and support for school personnel. Those 4 components make up the complete statement of aids and services. But specially designed instruction is only one of those components, and it falls under the special education section of the statement of aids and services. So let's break down SDI just a little bit further to make sure everyone has the foundation of what we're talking about when we reference the statement of SDI. As you can see from the title on the slide, special ed equals SDI. So your special education services that you're providing are the SDI for the student. The goals are not the SDI, the plaque is not the SDI, but the special ed services are what we consider the SDI. The SDI addresses the unique needs of the student, and it ensures that the student has access to the general education curriculum so the child can meet the educational standards applicable to their disability. It's key to know that SDI can be delivered by multiple people within a staff or on the IEP team. It is not the sole responsibility of the special education teacher. And when we utilize the DBI process, sometimes we bring in other supports to help us with that. As you can see on the screen, the graphic of this one and before are tip sheets that the Progress Center offers to break this down further, and I encourage you to explore those in the near future. So when we talk about SDI and we understand it's the special ed services and the instruction around what we're giving our students related to the goals that have been developed from the needs in the plaque, we break down SDI into 3 components. We talk about content, methodology, and delivery of instruction. So what does it mean? When we talk about content, we want to know what is taught to allow the student to access the general education program. Methodology is how do we teach that? Is that instructional practices and strategies that we use? And then we have the delivery of instruction, which is the who, the where, and the when. So who's teaching it? Where is it happening? In the special education classroom, in a small group, in a larger group, in the general education setting, etc. And when is how much time are we dedicating to that? And so in this slide, we start to illustrate what exactly are examples of this based on different categories of disabilities and how we can think about adapting one of these components. I will say when we talk about this in the DBI and we get to this step where we're adapting the SDI, it is natural for special education teachers to automatically go to delivery of instruction. We want to change how often we are seeing the student, how much time we service the student, but we need to not forget about methodology and content. We tend to forget to think about changing our teaching strategies, maybe the materials or the way that we're presenting information. And we tend to go to delivery of instruction. So we want to encourage that we see all 3. We also know that FAPE itself depends on fidelity, and the effectiveness of our SDI is about our ability to adapt the content methodology and delivery of instruction with fidelity. And so if we say we're going to do something for a certain amount of time for this many minutes, we need to ensure that the students are getting that content the way we designed it, so that we can ensure that the student is engaged and has quality services. This time I'm going to turn it back to Kyle. He is going to walk us through the remainder of the steps for DBI, and we will then engage with our panel.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So yeah, now that we really have a better understanding of what makes up specifically designed instruction, I think we can really move on to step 2, which is using the IEP to really develop a plan to progress monitor for reporting progress, as well as really continually guiding our instructional decision making. And so we'll look at a couple examples here of how we can let our data really drive our decision making. And so it's really through analyzing the data that we collect that we drive the decision making. Okay, so in this case, we have the initiation of the current IEP, which we really talked about as the first step for DBI. And now we have enough data here where we can really begin analyzing the effectiveness of our specifically designed instruction. And so in this thought bubble, this might be something, that as instructors, we ask ourselves, does this data indicate that the SDI is working? And as you can see, and really as a benefit of graphing data, we can tell many students with disabilities will respond to that initial delivery of high quality SDI. So as long as it's aligned to the needs that's resulting from the disability. And sometimes, right, we have this other case, right, where we analyze the data. We ask ourselves, again, do data indicate that the SDI is or is not working? And in some cases, we determine that for some students with disabilities, that initial design of our specifically designed instruction perhaps isn't adequate. And so that really moves us into this next, which would be our third step of data-based individualization. And this is where we're going to really use some informal data to develop a hypothesis about why the student is not responding, right? So we have progress monitoring data that clearly tells us that they're not making progress. So again, you can see in the case that they're non-responsive, we now want to move and really try to find some informal diagnostic data to really help tell us why the student is not responding. So the following can be useful when we consider developing that hypothesis statement about why the student perhaps is not responding to that initial SDI. Again, as Sarah mentioned earlier, perhaps it's the instructional design, the content, or the methodology. Perhaps it's the delivery or the fidelity of the specifically designed instruction that was delivered. And it can also at times just be specific to the learner's needs and circumstances. Either way, NCII, the National Center on Intensive Intervention, has a resource that can help educators formulate this hypothesis, and that's through the utilization of the taxonomy of intervention intensity dimensions, refining the hypothesis. And so on the next few slides, we're going to look at some examples of how to actually use informal diagnostic data to form a hypothesis about why a student's not responding, and also how to leverage that data to intensify the student's SDI. Okay, so I'm going to read this, but I'll try to do it very quickly. It's just a scenario where, again, we're using some informal diagnostic data, and then we're going to formulate a hypothesis. So in this situation, a teacher reviews classroom assessment data and conducts observations of the student's learning behavior. So again, we know that the student was non-responsive to that initial delivery. We're now collecting this diagnostic data to perhaps determine why. Why is it not successful? So behavior observations suggest that the student struggles to master skills as quickly as their same age peers and needs more practice opportunities than their peers. So this educator, perhaps with a team of other educators, determines this hypothesis, which is, if the student is provided additional opportunities of direct instruction, feedback, and practice on target skills, then the student would move to mastery of these skills more quickly. All right, So once we've formulated that hypothesis, that's where, we're going to then brainstorm possible adaptations that really fit that hypothesis, that perhaps meet the need of the hypothesis. So we're now moving into step 4, where we're looking at adapting, again, either intervention or, again, to this case, when we're talking about students receiving special education, really looking at adapting that specifically designed instruction that they're receiving through the IEP. Okay, so just remember, step 4 is really dependent on correct forming of the hypothesis. All right. All right, so again, same scenario. We have the same hypothesis here. And so now we're really asking ourselves, right? We have a hypothesis and we know that we need to adapt our SDI. So again, building on what Sarah told us about all of these components of SDI, we really want to ask ourselves, based on this hypothesis, what element of our specifically designed instruction needs to be adapted? Okay, so I'll give you guys just a couple seconds to think about that. And then, of course, I'll give you the answer as well. So in this case, what we really want to do is adapt our methodology, right? We really want to consider how the instruction is delivered or the practices and approach to the teacher is using to teach, okay? And again, we're going to look at a couple different scenarios here. All right, so again, another student that perhaps is not progressing with our initial design of SDI. And so we really need to formulate a hypothesis of why perhaps they're not. So we, again, can make a correct adaptation to the SDI. So we do have some diagnostic data, some informal data that indicates that the student has difficulty applying decoding strategies to words with short and long vowels, especially I and E. Okay, so our hypothesis here is if the student is provided explicit instruction in decoding short and long vowels, then the student will improve their decoding and oral reading fluency. So again, in considering this hypothesis, what specific element of SDI would we want to adapt, right, for this scenario? So in this scenario, we're really looking at adapting the content, the what, right, is being taught. All right, and I think I have one more, and I'm going to move quickly because I really want to give time for our panel. I think that's really the biggest thing that we want to highlight today is our panel. So for this last one, fidelity and observation data indicate that the student is becoming more frustrated and less engaged in the intervention. So our educator here hypothesizes that if the student was more engaged and able to control their frustration, then the student would benefit more from the academic instruction, right? So again, step 4, we want to ask ourselves, based on that hypothesis, what kind of adaptation to the specifically designed instruction do we need to adapt? So in this situation, again, looking at adapting the content, the what. All right. So once we've made that adaptation, it's really now just this continual process of monitoring the student's response to these additional adaptations to the specifically designed instruction. And we say at least 6 to 8 data points, and there's really no limit to it, right? It's just continually looking at that progress monitoring data in relation to their goal and determining, is the progress that they're making sufficient or not? And really, in terms of how many data points, it really does depend, but I think you would have to at least have 6 to 8 data points to even begin to make that determination. And so this is just a kind of a graphical example of that. And so the teacher here made a change to the original SDI. They made an adaptation, and she draws another phase line here, okay? This would allow the teacher to assess the impact of the SDI with the new adaptation in comparison to the SDI without the adaptation, okay? And so again, we're back to analyzing, right? Anytime we have data on a graph, we always want to, consider this analyzation piece. and really ask ourselves, is this sufficient progress? And in this case, the student is certainly making progress, which is indicated by that upward trend line. However, the progress really is not sufficient to help that student reach that ultimate goal. Okay, so in this case, we would really kind of reconvene as a team to review additional diagnostic data and identify new intensification strategies that can help this student reach their goal. So I think what we all need to understand that DBI really is an ongoing process that's based on student responsiveness to the specifically designed instruction, right? So as we adapt, we continually progress monitor, and depending on if they're responsive or non-responsive, it's just a continual kind of cycle through this, where we would then look at additional diagnostic data, make additional adaptations, and continually monitor a student's progress, right? So, I mean, essentially it can look like something like this, right? Where in this graph, we can see that this team has utilized several adaptations through the data-based individualization process to adapt the student's specifically designed instruction. Okay. All right. So I'm excited for you guys to hear from our panel, but I'm going to kick it back to Sarah, because Sarah's going to really get us started with the panel. So Sarah, go ahead.
Thank you, Kyle. And I really just wanted to hit home what Kyle said, is that this is an ongoing process. And we have 3 panelists from the state of Wyoming who have taken this initiative and made it a statewide process. They come to us, actually, Jennifer Hiller is currently in Colorado, but she led this process at the state department level for the WDE. Carrie Jenkins is a special education teacher currently in the Laramie County District, as well as Sarah Finch. They have all taken part in the DBI process for specially designed instruction for roughly 5+ years. Their insight and their background in this process and how it applies is extremely helpful to understand what Kyle and I discussed today. So I'm going to ask that Sarah and Carrie turn on their camera. Kyle's going to stop sharing the PowerPoint so we can see each panelist a little bit better. And I am going to ask each one of them a couple of questions, and they're going to take an opportunity to share their experiences with this process. So Jennifer, I'm going to start with you today. Can you please describe how the State Department set up and coached the DBI and SCI process?
Okay, so this was a few years ago, so I'll try to remember the best I can. But really, our intention was we did some broad statewide awareness, but quickly wanted to hone in on our teachers. And so starting small was kind of our mantra, right? We put an application out there. We gave information, of course, about this whole process, year-long commitments, had a few teachers in a few districts. And we kept that same idea as far as, okay, now you're committed to this process. We're going to work through this with you. Let's just do this with a couple kids, maybe 1 kid, maybe 2 kids, right? We're not going to get this too overwhelming to begin with. And so I think that our idea was to start small. We wanted to show student success. And success is whatever that means for that particular individual student, right? And so if we were able to keep it very targeted and intentional for our teachers to begin with, our teachers started to see the success right away with their kids. And the other 2 panelists will speak beautifully to that, because they have just, it's so exciting to hear. And along, so it was kind of building that small little cadre community of coaches, or trainers, if you will, right? And the idea was that we build the capacity within our special ed teachers, and that they go ahead and continue to support that with their students, of course, but with other, other professionals within their building, or their district. And I think that, as far as the state side collecting data, we really wanted again to collect that, student level data again to show success, right? We wanted and to show, that we have something, we implemented this, we're going through this process, we have a result, we see something, and it was. It was very exciting for me to see, because now as a teacher back in the classroom, I continue to use all of these practices, whether I have a problem solving team with me or not with a particular student. I just use, all of the things that, we implemented in Wyoming to think through on for my students. Um, I think that is that kind of a nice little summary of how we got started. Start small, show success.
And you built a cohort of coaches across the state.
Yes, yes,
Yes.
yes. And I guess to add to that, we also believe strongly, and I still to this day, the most powerful trainers, the most powerful voices are the people that are doing it, right? So you're going to hear from, I'm pointing to them on the screen above me, you're going to hear from 2 teachers that are doing it, and that's the power in it. They're doing it. So we wanted the voices in the field to come out.
Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate your response. Carrie, I have a question for you. What evidence do you have as a practitioner that supports the use of DBI with special education students? Have you seen a reduction in behavior? Have you been able to reduce services for students? How have you been able to engage differently with your students?
Okay. Yes. So I just wanted to say that I've been teaching special ed for about, 24 years. And so this is my 6th year of using DBI. And I have to say that going through this process and following the framework has really changed my teaching and my thinking along the ways. And so just to begin with, I used to do the progress monitoring, thought that I was, would gather data from my students, look at it once a quarter, show my students, thinking that I was doing everything, right. And I wasn't seeing that growth. And after being trained in this system, I just saw all these components that were necessary to follow through. And I think the biggest thing for me and my students has been sharing the data with my students and really having those conversations with them. And before, I think I had their data notebooks, I would say, oh, look, you grew this much. And then we put the data notebook on the shelf and we'd move on and go to the next thing. But they had buy-in. We would talk about their goals. We would really look at things. And a conversation that I would have with my students is, it's not, if you're not showing growth, it's not because of you. It's what I need to do as a teacher as well. If you're not growing, then I need to change the way that I am teaching you, or, look at a evidence-based program that's going to fit your needs. And so really, having those conversations. As far as seeing the growth, I always like to tell a couple of stories at a 2nd grade student. I saw him for reading, and then also he was on a behavior plan. And we just looked at that data every week, and he understood what that meant. We talked about, what the graph looked like, what the trend line, he could interpret that to his parents. He could talk, about his growth and things like that. And he really showed ownership of that. And as we saw the increase in his reading skills and his fluency start to build, lo and behold, his behavior really improved as well. And pretty soon we actually graduated him from his behavior plan, and he did a cute little video one time, and was so proud and was showing that it's really neat because now he's a 5th grader and he was a 2nd grader, and he doesn't even receive reading services anymore. And just to have that ownership, and and he saw that made a big difference with him, and it was tangible and he could see that. And there were times, my goodness, he was a challenge. And I would sit down with my coach. I had a coach from the state. I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like we're hitting a brick wall. What can we do? And he would take me back to a lot of those steps that we just went over, and just putting in that time and looking at. It's not that I changed my entire thing of what I was doing. It was like I was really honing in on what he needed. So yes, I've seen some great, and when I look at the data, I look at it a lot differently than I did before. It's just not, little pieces on a graph. It was, gosh, this is what they need. And then I've seen myself grown, as well as when I developed those IEPs. We're changing things in the state of Wyoming as well. Writing our PLAFs a little bit differently and talking about, needs and impact, the impact statements and those types of things. And so I find a lot of my DBI training coming into that as well. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, that was wonderful. And my takeaway from what you said is that it wasn't in addition to what you were already doing. It sounded like, maybe I'm using a different word, but maybe you were systematizing the process that you used in determining what the student needed. And I love that, because I feel like special educators out there right now feel very overwhelmed, and that this isn't in addition to it. This is helping them do the great work that they're already doing, but amplifying it to a way that really makes a difference for students. So thank you for sharing that, Carrie. What a valuable insight you have on.
Thank you.
Sarah, can I ask you a question? As a new DBI coach in the state of Wyoming and a special education teacher, how has this impacted your instruction in meeting the individualized needs of your students?
Yes, so DBI has changed everything about how I teach. When I first started, however, I will back up a little bit and say that it was very, very overwhelming for me. So I have been teaching about almost 9 years now, and I've been doing DBI for about 5 years, implementing DBI for 5 years, and then coaching for about 3 years. But when we first started DBI, it was really overwhelming for me because I understood the big concepts, but I had to do it and implement it in order to really see what I was doing. It really was very overwhelming, but because of what Jennifer was talking about, starting out small and growing bigger, it really helped me just focus on one piece and one element of it at a time. What was so encouraging about my coach is that I was already doing a lot of things, and we all are. We're all teaching. We're all trying to do the best we can to meet the needs of the students. But what we found out was I was able to just kind of fine tune the lens of my teaching. And then through the DBI process, I started to just have all these aha moments over the years. So DBI impacted the special education process to really understand the big picture of those big high stakes assessments. So those grade level outcome measures, understanding where benchmarks lie, all the way down to really fine tuning what type of assessments we were looking for to actually progress monitor our students. And just digging in with more assessments instead of taking one big test and then trying to determine a goal from that. It wasn't as efficient. And then all the way down to writing our goals, and then making sure that we had taxonomy and understanding what interventions we were using and if we were doing it with fidelity. So DBI has been this I guess this thread throughout the entire special education process. And so as I'm fine tuning everything throughout the years of doing this and having coaches and being a coach, I'm really able to understand how to intensify my teaching, and the need to have really good teaching just continued to grow, and I continued to see things, and my lens of teaching became stronger, all the way down to wanting to be so intentional with students coming into the classroom and being efficient with that, and every minute counts, and not with panic or fear, but with encouragement and intensity. And it helped me build how I was engaging with my students and how my students' behaviors were increasing or decreasing. I think a huge piece is sometimes the differentiation between how special education is viewed and how regular education is viewed within a school. And sometimes they're pretty separated. And so through DBI and having data and having that fidelity data of how much time I had with students and the progress monitoring and whether they are engaged, all of those really good pieces, we were able to bring that to grade level PLCs and have conversations with our principal, which opened up the eyes of our school. And as time went on, we were able to make really healthy changes in our buildings, such as a really big issue for our building was the schedule, and making sure that our interventionists and our special education teachers had the time that they needed to pull the kids, and teachers were able to really respect and honor the resource time. And then we were honoring and respecting that tier 1 instruction. And it would just bridge the communication of teachers and parents and students. And I loved what Carrie said about empowering the students. That has been huge. I have so many similar stories too of sharing data with kids and making an impact with them. And kids would look forward to that progress monitoring day, because it's just that one quick check, right? It's not this big, long assessment. You're just checking the specific skill and monitoring that and growing that. But it's everywhere. It's been awesome.
Wow, thank you. You get me excited just listening to you. We've had a couple of questions come in on the chat that I just want to provide some clarification, or give you guys an opportunity to provide some clarification around. Jennifer, would you kind of explain when you built the capacity for coaching within the state of Wyoming, were you only using teachers? Were the coaches outside of this teaching role? What did that look like? There was a question about that.
I have to try to remember when it first started, it was outside. So the teachers were kind of the state was utilizing state coaches to come in to kind of support that initially. Then to grow it to, like Sarah right now, it becoming a coach through that process. So initially there were some outside coaches. And I think what also is wonderful with this is that when somebody said earlier, like buy-in, like it doesn't, you just need somebody who is ready, willing, and wanting to kind of go down this road, right? And so it could be a variety. That's what, like, there's no check boxes as far as who it has to be in your building, right, to develop that coach. But I think that it could be an administrator, teacher, lead. I love the idea that our special ed teachers are becoming those coaches. And so it was outside, but then it has grown to be more internal within the districts, if that helps.
Thank you for that clarification. And this could be either Carrie or Sarah. How have you, as coaches or also within your school, created buy-in to this process? What has helped you get other staff members engaged, or if you're working with staff members in other districts, how have you helped them engage administrators, teachers?
So I can speak, and then Sarah, please chime in. But I think going back to what Jennifer said, the buy-in for me was easy because I was looking for something like this all along. As a special ed teacher, I felt like I was kind of on an island by myself. And I was looking for a systematic structure. And so when, I had the opportunity to learn more, I thought, oh my goodness, finally an answer, something. And as, Sarah said, it is very overwhelming when you start to begin, because you think, my goodness, it's something I'm going to have to create a whole new thing, and it's not. You just have to take it slow, take it small. And as far as, I'm also a coach, and I think sharing my stories with others and showing the success with other teachers, and I think also sharing resources for me. When I went through that process of DBI and I was able to go through and research some of those evidence-based programs, that's where it really clicked for me. Because I think before I was using a lot of like what some of the things that, general ed curriculum was using, or some that Title was using. I didn't really have anything. I'm like, this isn't what my kids need. They need something else. And so I was able to go through and do the research and, look at the effect size and see, what was working and what wasn't, and, what my students needed. And for me, that's where it clicked. And when they, I've heard other teachers say too that I've coached, wow, it really is eye-opening, because you're going through the process and you're seeing that. So just kind of reassuring them and taking it slow and saying, okay, you have to put the time in. I always tell my, the practitioners that I work with, I tell them that that time is valuable. Sarah had mentioned it too. It's sacred. Once I realized that, and filling out those fidelity logs, and, yes, I have 30 minutes, but by the time I got done, oh my gosh, and all the interruptions, it was 20 minutes. And making sure that that time is secure, and how important it is for the growth of our students. So I think just jumping in and being part of that.
Good afternoon.
Sorry.
Thank you, Carrie. And Sarah, just to segue a little bit on that, they are asking, how do you create buy-in with students in this process when it comes to assessing, progress monitoring, and being much more direct with how you're interacting and instructing them?
It absolutely creates buy-in with students, like hands down. My most difficult learners, my or reluctant learners, my students with the highest behavior, because it shows their success. And for me, a lot of my students, we progress monitor weekly because our goals are so intensive. It's that really tier 3 instruction. So it has changed the culture of the classroom. So for me, we work on our specific goals. Everyone has their own very individualized plan, even though there's some students who are doing similar things, like say math, and then it's, anyway, I won't get into that. But on Thursdays, we progress monitor, and everyone knows that they're going to progress monitor for their quick learning check. And we don't make it miserable. And with practice, it becomes easier when they first do it. We used to progress monitor monthly, and it was this big half-hour, sometimes 40 long assessments. And then it was hard to determine what they were growing on because it was all these questions. And so DBI helped me refine that into the specific skill tied to their IEP goal, right? Lots and lots of data. And the students do their quick learning check, and we graph it together. And then I usually do like a little reward system for that. So they always look forward to that on progress monitoring days. But the students see weekly whether they grow or not. And then that's where the magic happens, because we have the conversation of encouragement, because you love your students. So I'm so proud of you. You worked so hard. Look what you did. You did that. And because you've been so intentional with your teaching, you already know the success that they're going to have. And on the other side of it, when I have a student who will have really, really bad days, and, depending on which home he's in during the weekend, and he will come to school and he will just bomb a data point. And then that becomes a good conversation, right? You say, oh man, today was a hard day, wasn't it? What can we do next time? What should we work on? Let's make a plan for the next week. And so you have this rapport building weekly with your students. And by the end of the year, you see all of this growth, all of this data, and the kids are proud. They share it at progress reports and parent teacher conferences. They share it with their teachers. I had a kid take their progress monitoring graph and go to their classroom. So they'd be, look what I did. And you can have all those celebrations. Whereas before, like Gary said, like, plot your data point. All right, let's keep going. And we did that. So it's very, very impactful for students. because they see themselves growing. Awesome.
Thank you. Well, we're getting close to our time, and I want to thank our panelists very much for joining us and the hard work that you've done over the years mastering this. We do have additional questions in the chat box. We will get answers to you. We will speak with our panelists, or myself or Kyle will respond to your questions. This is done across all grade levels. There was a quick question around, is this done in middle school and high school? Yes, it can be done in all grade levels. They have coaches that have worked with all grade levels. So just a quick answer there. Before we end today, I just wanted to share a few resources. I know it was shared in the chat. Kyle, if you go to the next slide, I would appreciate it. If you're interested in hearing a little bit more about the DBI implementation in Wyoming, we do have some resources on the National Center for Intensive Intervention website on the project that they did with these ladies. Some of the ladies are featured in these short YouTube videos, but it does create a bigger picture. It talks about families and students. So some of your questions will likely be answered if you watched these videos. Next slide. We also have some additional supports and resources that have been conducted. Another webinar on the comprehensive statement of aids and services, and then the tip sheets that the Progress Center offers. So if you like to dive a little bit deeper into that, we encourage you to visit those resources at promotingprogress.org. Next slide. For those of you interested, the Progress Center has a virtual event that we host every year. It's our second year, Prepping for Progress. It's August 2nd through the 4th, and you can check out registration at the promotingprogress.org. It'll be opening up here very soon, and we will be having a day where NCII is presenting information and resources that they have. It's a collaborative event as well. So we encourage you to register for that. We'll take some deep dives into the IEP writing process, as well as SDI at the secondary level, just to highlight a few of our targeted points. Please visit us on Facebook, Twitter, or Promoting Progress. Sign up for our newsletter. And I'm going to send it back over to Kyle to talk about some resources at NCII.
Yeah, I actually saw a message come through the chat where one of our attendees mentioned the wonderful resources that are available through our NCII website. So that is intensiveintervention.org. There's several resources, just, starting with DBI, kind of getting more information on what exactly is DBI. We have lots of information on getting ready. So lots of resources on readiness, how to begin thinking about how to implement DBI. I know our panel would speak to these resources as well. I know they leveraged and utilized many of the resources to do the things that they spoke about today. So very helpful that everyone on the call today would utilize these free resources through intervention.org. And I think that's it. We just really want to thank you all for taking the time. We really want to thank our panel. We know that, we could talk about DBI and SDI all day, but I think what teachers and educators really want to know is, how do these initiatives get implemented, and, how are they effective? And so special thanks to our panel, but also, again, thanks to everyone who took the time to come learn more about DBI and SDI. If you would, please just complete this brief survey. You can get your phone, smartphone, and scan this QR code. It'll take you to a survey where, we would then utilize that data, right? Much like we talk about with DBI and SDI. Leveraging that data to really look at our future events and how to make those more meaningful. So yeah, I think that's it. I know there's a disclaimer here. And then
there was one more quick question about whether we're going to be able to get back to the Q&A. To the Q&A questions, we'll email you answers. If we did not get a chance to answer them today, we were making sure we stayed in our time limit. So I will get answers off to you. Our registration is not open quite yet. It should be open in the next week or two. So please check back at Progress Center if you would like to attend our event in August. We would love to have all of you back.
Yeah, and then we'll leave you with Sarah and I's information. Feel free to reach out to us. Again, these are the websites for Progress Center as well as the National Center on Intensive Intervention. And we hope that you all have a wonderful day. And again, thanks for attending.